Never make a bet with your best friend unless you're prepared to learn something about yourself you were never supposed to know. Looking back, I should have laughed, grabbed another slice of pizza, and let someone else become the punchline that night. Instead, I raised my hand, smiled like an idiot, and said, "Fine. Deal." That's how everything changed. My name is Miles Bennett, and until 30 days ago, I thought I knew exactly who Logan Mercer was. We'd been best friends since freshman year of college, survived impossible landlords, cross-country road trips in a truck that barely deserved 4 wheels, and enough terrible dating stories to fill an entire podcast. Logan was the kind of guy who could walk into any room and somehow make strangers feel like old friends. As a firefighter, he stayed calm when everyone else panicked. I was almost the opposite. I photographed buildings for architects, spending more time adjusting camera angles than making eye contact. If Logan was sunlight, I was the guy checking the weather forecast before opening the blinds. Our friends claimed we balanced each other out. We insisted they watched too many romantic movies. The bet started during Olivia's birthday party in a crowded rooftop apartment overlooking downtown Denver. Someone suggested a ridiculous card game that slowly turned into everyone exposing embarrassing habits. One friend admitted he alphabetized his spice rack. Another confessed she still slept with a childhood blanket hidden under expensive bedding. Then someone looked at Logan and asked what he thought my worst habit was. He didn't hesitate. Miles never chooses himself. Laughter bounced around the room because everyone assumed he was joking. I didn't. Logan looked directly at me, completely serious. You overthink every decision until life makes it for you. I rolled my eyes. That's dramatic. Prove me wrong. How? He leaned back in his chair, wearing that calm smile that somehow always made me nervous. For 30 days, outside of work, you let me make your daily decisions. Clothes, restaurants, weekend plans, coffee orders. Nothing dangerous, nothing embarrassing. Just trust me. The room exploded. With reactions. Half our friends shouted that it was the dumbest idea they'd ever heard. The other half immediately wanted updates. I laughed because saying no would make everyone think Logan had touched a nerve. Easy, I said. You'll get bored by Tuesday. Logan extended his hand across the table. 30 days. I shook it. 30 days. Someone recorded the handshake. Someone else demanded written rules on a paper napkin. By midnight, everyone had forgotten about the bet except Logan. At 6:17 the next morning, my phone buzzed before my alarm. His message contained only 6 words. Rule number 1. Wear the blue jacket. I stared at the screen, confused. I hadn't worn that jacket in almost 2 years. It still hung untouched in the back of my closet with the tags folded neatly inside one pocket. I almost ignored him. Almost. Instead, I found myself pulling it on before leaving my apartment, wondering why my best friend sounded so certain about a jacket, and why, for reasons I couldn't explain, I suddenly wanted to know what rule number 2 would be. The blue jacket earned 3 compliments before 10 o'clock, which was exactly 3 more compliments than I had received about my clothes in the previous 6 months combined. One came from the receptionist at an architecture firm, another from the owner of my favorite coffee shop. The third arrived in the form of a text from my younger sister that simply read, "Finally, you stopped dressing like a depressed documentary narrator." I stared at my phone in complete disbelief before forwarding the screenshot to Logan. His reply came less than 30 seconds later. Told you. I refused to give him the satisfaction of admitting he had been right. Instead, I sent back a rolling eyes emoji and buried myself in work, spending the next several hours photographing a renovated courthouse on the edge of the city. Normally, I would have skipped lunch, edited photos in my truck, and answered emails until sunset. At exactly 12:15, my phone buzzed again. Rule number 2. Eat somewhere without checking the reviews first. I laughed out loud. That was impossible. I checked reviews for everything. Restaurants, dry cleaners, dentists. Once I had compared customer ratings for parking garages. It was called being prepared. Logan called it hiding behind other people's opinions. I stood outside a small diner with a faded red sign that looked older than both of us combined. 3 pickup trucks sat in the parking lot. A handwritten menu was taped crookedly inside the front window. I reached for my phone automatically. Then I remembered the bet. My thumb hovered over the search bar before I sighed, shoved my phone back into my pocket, and walked inside anyway. The waitress smiled before I even found a booth. She recommended the chicken pot pie without looking at the menu. I ordered it because, technically, I was following instructions. 20 minutes later, I realized it was probably the best lunch I had eaten all year. I hated that realization almost as much as I hated texting Logan a picture of the empty plate. His answer was infuriatingly simple. See, the pattern continued for the rest of the week. He told me to leave work before dark one evening, and I accidentally watched the sunset from City Park instead of my editing desk. He insisted I call my mother instead of sending another quick text. The conversation lasted 45 minutes, ending with her laughing so hard she almost forgot why she had called in the first place. On Friday morning, he sent another message. Rule number 3. Bring your camera. Do not ask questions. Meet me at Union Station at 6. That was all. No explanation. No clues. Every logical part of my brain demanded details. The rest of me, the part that had started waking up curious about whatever ridiculous idea Logan had planned next, simply packed my camera bag. When 6 o'clock arrived, Logan leaned against his old pickup truck wearing jeans, a gray sweatshirt, and the relaxed grin that usually meant trouble was nearby. Ready? He asked. For what? He opened the passenger door with a dramatic flourish. That question is against the spirit of the bet. I climbed inside anyway, pretending my heartbeat was perfectly normal as downtown disappeared behind us. Somewhere between the city lights and the open highway, I realized something unsettling. I had stopped wondering whether Logan would make a bad decision for me. I had started wondering why every choice he made felt strangely like coming home. The drive lasted almost an hour, and Logan refused to answer a single question the entire time. Every time I asked where we were going, he either turned the radio up a little louder or pointed dramatically at another mountain in the distance like it was somehow an acceptable explanation. By the time he finally pulled into a gravel parking lot surrounded by towering pine trees, I had already invented at least 12 terrible possibilities. You dragged me into the middle of nowhere, I said, climbing out of the truck. That is a strong opinion from someone who agreed to surrender decision-making for 30 days, Logan replied with an infuriating grin. The late afternoon air smelled like pine, warm earth, and the faint sweetness of wildflowers drifting through the valley. A narrow hiking trail disappeared into the trees ahead of us. Families passed by carrying backpacks, children laughed somewhere near a creek, and an older couple shared a picnic beneath an enormous cottonwood tree. Nothing about the place looked extraordinary, yet everything felt strangely peaceful. Logan adjusted the strap on my camera bag before handing it back to me. Rule number 4, he said. Today you are not allowed to photograph buildings. I stared at him. That is literally my favorite thing to photograph. Exactly. So what am I supposed to take pictures of? He shrugged. Whatever makes you stop checking whether every shot is technically perfect. I frowned as we started walking. My camera usually searched for straight lines, dramatic architecture, and perfect symmetry. Here there were only crooked branches, uneven rocks, sunlight filtering through leaves, and people enjoying an ordinary Saturday. It felt messy, unpredictable, alive. Logan never walked far ahead or behind me. Somehow he always stayed close enough to point out something I had completely missed. A little girl feeding ducks at the edge of a pond. An elderly man tying bright blue ribbons onto a wooden walking stick for his granddaughter. 2 golden retrievers racing through shallow water with complete confidence that the world existed purely for their entertainment. Every time I lifted my camera, Logan stayed completely silent. No instructions, no criticism, just patience. Hours slipped by before I realized I had barely looked at my phone. The sun drifted lower, turning the entire lake into liquid gold. I crouched near the shoreline, adjusting my lens toward the reflection of orange clouds dancing across the water. Without thinking, I glanced sideways. Logan stood a few yards away with his hands in the pockets of his sweatshirt, watching the sunset instead of me. The light caught the edges of his face, softening features I had memorized years ago without ever admitting it. I pressed the shutter almost automatically. Click. He turned his head. Did you just take my picture? I lowered the camera, suddenly feeling caught doing something strangely personal. You happened to be standing in front of the sunset. Logan laughed quietly. Sure. Blame the sunset. My face grew warmer than the evening air. I quickly looked down at the camera screen, expecting to delete the photo immediately. Instead, I stopped breathing for a second. Logan was smiling at something outside the frame, completely unaware of how relaxed he looked. There was nothing posed about it. No performance. Just genuine contentment frozen in a single moment. It was easily my favorite photograph I had taken all year. Logan noticed my expression and stepped closer. "Good shot," he asked. I locked the screen before he could see it. "It is different." He nodded like that answer alone told him everything. As we walked back toward the truck beneath a sky slowly filling with stars, my phone vibrated once more. Another message from Logan appeared, even though he was only a few feet away. Rule number 5. Stop pretending you only notice beautiful things through a camera. Monday arrived with rain tapping softly against my apartment windows, and for the first time in years, I realized I was checking my phone before I checked my work schedule. Sure enough, Logan had already sent another message. Rule number 6. Say yes to the first invitation you receive today. No excuses. I stared at the screen while pouring coffee into my favorite mug. "You really enjoy making my life complicated," I muttered, even though he could not hear me. Less than an hour later, my phone rang. It was Melissa, one of the interior designers I worked with every few months. "A bunch of us are grabbing dinner after the client meeting tonight," she said. "You always disappear after work. Come this time." Every instinct told me to politely decline. I had editing to finish, laundry waiting in the dryer, emails that suddenly felt incredibly urgent. Then I remembered the rule. "Sure," I heard myself answer. "I will be there." Dinner turned out to be surprisingly fun. People told ridiculous stories about impossible clients. Someone accidentally knocked over a basket of fries. Melissa admitted she once spent 3 hours photographing the wrong building because she had copied the wrong address into her calendar. Everyone laughed, including her. Normally, I would have smiled politely, finished my meal, and left early. Instead, I stayed until the restaurant closed. As I walked toward my truck, another message appeared. "Good. Human interaction did not kill you." I laughed so loudly that a couple walking their dog glanced in my direction. I replied with only one word. "Annoying." His response came almost immediately. "Progress." The next morning brought the rule that confused me more than any of the others. Rule number 7. This Saturday, if anyone asks, introduce me as the most important person in your life. I stopped halfway through unlocking my office door. Surely that had to be a joke. I called him before I could think better of it. "You cannot be serious." Logan answered with suspicious calm. "I am completely serious. People are going to think that sounds weird. Only if you make it weird." "It is weird." "Miles." His voice softened just enough to make me stop pacing. "It is one sentence. You can survive one sentence." "Why?" There was a brief silence on the line. Not awkward, just thoughtful. "Because I think you spend too much time worrying about how honest answers might sound." Before I could respond, his radio crackled faintly in the background. Someone at the station needed him. "I have to go," he said. "See you Saturday." The call ended, leaving me alone with a question that refused to disappear. Saturday arrived faster than I expected. Olivia had organized a neighborhood charity picnic in a downtown park, and nearly everyone from our friend group showed up carrying folding chairs, coolers, and enough homemade desserts to feed an entire baseball team. Logan walked over balancing 2 paper cups of lemonade, looking completely at ease beneath the bright summer sky. We spent the afternoon laughing through lawn games, teasing each other about impossible trivia questions, and helping children retrieve frisbees that had landed in inconvenient places. It almost felt like every other weekend we had shared over the past several years until Olivia's grandmother smiled warmly at me and asked the simplest question imaginable. "Young man," she said, glancing toward Logan, "and who might this handsome fellow be to you?" My heartbeat stumbled as Logan quietly looked at me without saying a single word, waiting to see whether I would follow the rule. For one impossible second, every sound around me seemed to disappear. Children were still laughing somewhere across the park. Someone nearby was arguing over the score of a cornhole game, and a dog barked excitedly as it chased a tennis ball across the grass. Yet all I could hear was my own heartbeat. Logan did not rescue me. He simply stood beside me holding 2 paper cups of lemonade with the same calm expression he always wore whenever he believed I could handle something on my own. I remembered the rule. I took a slow breath and smiled at Olivia's grandmother. "This is Logan," I said. "He is the most important person in my life." The words left my mouth more naturally than I expected. The older woman smiled with genuine warmth. "Well, that is a wonderful thing to have," she replied before complimenting Logan's manners and wandering off to speak with someone else. That was it. No awkward silence. No confused questions. No dramatic reaction. Just a simple conversation that somehow left me feeling strangely unsteady. Logan handed me one of the lemonades. "You survived," he said, with a grin. "Barely. Did the sky fall?" "No." "Did anyone faint?" "No." "Interesting." I shook my head. "You enjoy this far too much." He only laughed before changing the subject, and the afternoon continued as though nothing unusual had happened. The strange part was that I kept replaying those words in my head. The most important person in my life. I had only said them because of the bet. Had not I? A few days later, my routine returned to normal until Melissa stopped by my desk carrying 2 coffees. "I have been meaning to ask you something," she said. "There is a food festival downtown this Saturday. Would you like to go with me?" I blinked. Melissa was funny, thoughtful, and easy to spend time with. Under ordinary circumstances, I probably would have considered the invitation for several days before giving an answer. Instead, another thought arrived first. According to the rules, Logan had final say over plans outside of work. I almost laughed at how ridiculous my own life had become. That evening I met Logan at our usual neighborhood diner. Before the waitress even brought our meals, I leaned back in the booth and explained what had happened. "Melissa invited me to the festival." Logan nodded once. "Okay. According to the bet, you decide." He looked down at his coffee without speaking. I expected him to tease me, ask a dozen unnecessary questions, or remind me that I should stop overthinking everything. Instead, the silence stretched long enough to become uncomfortable. Finally, I smiled. "So what is the ruling?" Logan lifted his eyes to meet mine. His expression was steady, but something behind it felt different, almost guarded. He answered with only one word. "No." I laughed because I assumed he was joking. He did not laugh back. "Wait," I said. "Seriously?" "Seriously." "Why not?" He wrapped both hands around his coffee mug, staring into it for a moment before looking back at me. "Because I said no." That is not an explanation. The rules never required one. I searched his face for the familiar grin that always appeared after one of his practical jokes, but it never came. For the first time since this strange bet had started, Logan was not acting. Like someone trying to help me discover something new. He looked like someone trying very hard to keep something from slipping out instead. The conversation ended there, but the silence followed me home like an unexpected passenger. I had agreed to let Logan make my decisions, yet this was the first time one of his answers felt less like a challenge and more like a wall. I tried convincing myself that he had a perfectly reasonable explanation. Maybe he thought Melissa and I were not compatible. Maybe he believed I needed a quiet weekend instead of another social event. Maybe he was simply testing whether I would trust him without demanding every detail. None of those explanations sounded convincing once I said them out loud inside my empty apartment. The next morning, there was no new rule waiting on my phone. For nearly 3 weeks, Logan had sent one every single day. Suddenly, nothing. I checked my messages twice before setting the phone down on the kitchen counter. By lunchtime, I had looked at it at least 15 more times. Around 4 in the afternoon, a text finally appeared. "Busy shift today. Come by the station after work if you have time." No rule. No joke. Just a simple invitation. When I arrived, the station was quieter than I expected. Logan was finishing paperwork at a desk near the back office while 2 of his co-workers debated baseball scores over coffee. He smiled when he saw me and pointed toward a chair. "Give me 5 minutes." I nodded and wandered toward the small lounge area, where shelves held old photographs, board games, and stacks of magazines that looked older than either of us. I was examining a framed picture of the crew during a charity fundraiser when one of the firefighters walked over carrying a notebook with a dark blue cover. "Is this Logan's?" he asked. He left it in the truck again. Before I could answer, another voice called from the garage, asking for help moving equipment. "Can you hand it to him?" the firefighter said, placing the notebook on the table before hurrying away. I looked at the cover for several seconds. Every reasonable instinct told me not to open it. Then I noticed a loose page sticking halfway out from the middle. Worried it might fall, I carefully reached to tuck it back inside. The notebook opened by accident. My eyes landed on a handwritten page dated almost 2 years earlier. I froze. It was not a schedule. It was a list. Miles always orders the same coffee, even when he wants to try something different. Miles pretends he does not like birthdays, but always saves every card people give him. Miles smiles differently when he forgets someone is looking. I turned one page, then another. There were dozens of entries. each one describing something so ordinary that I had never imagined anyone else had noticed. The first snowfall always improves his mood. He relaxes whenever there is music playing in the background. He says he hates being the center of attention, but he lights up when someone sincerely appreciates his photographs. None of it looked like strategy for winning a bet. It looked like years of quiet observation. Near the front of the notebook, I found another page with a single sentence written across the top. If I ever get one chance to help him choose himself, do not waste it. My chest tightened as footsteps approached behind me. I looked up to see Logan standing in the doorway. He glanced at the open notebook, then back at me. Neither of us spoke. For the first time since this strange month had begun, I realized the bet might never have been about winning at all. Logan did not look angry. He did not look embarrassed either. He simply looked tired, like someone who had been carrying a conversation inside his own head for far too long. He stepped into the room, picked up the notebook from the table, and held it against his chest for a moment before letting out a slow breath. "You were not supposed to see that yet," he said quietly. I searched for something clever to say, but every sentence disappeared before reaching my mouth. "How long?" was all I managed. Logan gave a small smile that never reached his eyes. "Long enough that I stopped counting." The station around us continued with its usual rhythm. Someone laughed in the garage. A coffee maker hummed in the corner. Ordinary life kept moving while mine suddenly felt completely different. "Those notes," I began. "They are not about the bet." "No." "Then why write them?" He rested the notebook on the table between us. "Because I noticed things." His answer sounded almost too simple. "Everyone notices things," I said. "Not like this." Logan shook his head. "Most people notice the loud moments. I noticed the quiet ones. The way you always choose the chair facing the window. The fact that you skip breakfast whenever you are nervous about a project. How you apologize for things that are not your fault. How you always make everyone else's life easier while making your own harder." I stared at him without interrupting. Every example landed with uncomfortable accuracy. "The bet was never supposed to be about controlling you," he continued. "I already knew I could not do that. I just needed an excuse to push you outside the routines you built around yourself." I remembered the blue jacket, the diner without online reviews, the hike, the phone call with my mother, the sunset, the picnic, every strange little rule that had seemed random at first. None of them had been random. They had all pointed in the same direction, toward a version of myself I had forgotten existed. "Then why tell me not to go to the festival with Melissa?" I asked. For the first time since we had started talking, Logan hesitated. He looked toward the floor before answering. "Because I knew I was not being objective anymore." "What does that mean?" He smiled sadly. "It means that was the first rule I made for myself instead of for you." Silence settled between us again, but this time it felt honest instead of awkward. I finally understood why he had refused to explain his answer that night in the diner. Any explanation would have revealed too much. Logan rubbed the back of his neck and laughed softly at himself. "Do you know what the funniest part is?" I shook my head. "I spent weeks trying to convince you to stop hiding from your own feelings while I was doing exactly the same thing." I looked at the notebook again. It contained no elaborate plan for winning a ridiculous challenge. Only years of quiet observations from someone who had been paying attention when I never realized anyone was watching. "So every rule," I said, "was designed to help you trust yourself a little more," Logan replied. "If that happened, I would have considered the whole thing a success, no matter how it ended." His words should have made everything simpler. Instead, they raised one question that neither of us had been brave enough to ask. If the bet had never been about winning, then what exactly had Logan been hoping for from the very beginning? Neither of us spoke during the drive home. The familiar streets of Denver rolled past the windows while the conversation from the fire station echoed louder than the engine. Logan did not reach for another rule. He did not try to explain himself any further. Somehow, that silence carried more honesty than any speech either of us could have prepared. The following morning, I woke up expecting another message to appear on my phone. It never came. 8 o'clock passed, then noon, then evening. For the first time since our ridiculous agreement had begun, there was no instruction waiting for me. On the second day, I finally gave in and drove to Logan's apartment after work. He answered the door wearing an old gray sweater, holding a coffee mug in one hand, and looking almost relieved to see me. "I was wondering how long it would take," he admitted. "You stopped sending rules," I replied. "I noticed." He stepped aside, inviting me in. The paper agreement from Olivia's birthday was sitting on his kitchen table, still folded exactly the way someone had tucked it into a pocket weeks earlier. Logan picked it up carefully, smoothing the creases with the palm of his hand before looking at me. "Today is day 30, he said. I had been so distracted by everything else that I had completely lost track of the calendar. He smiled gently, reached into a drawer, and placed a pair of scissors beside the paper. "The bet is over." Before I could respond, he cut the page cleanly down the middle. Then again, and again, the handwritten rules disappeared into a small pile of paper strips that scattered across the tabletop. He pushed them aside without ceremony. "From this moment on," he said quietly, "you do not have to follow a single thing I say." I stared at the torn pieces, surprised by the strange emptiness settling in my chest. For nearly a month, every morning had begun with one unexpected decision. Every day had carried some small challenge that quietly changed the way I looked at my own life. Now there was nothing. No messages. No directions. Just me. Logan leaned back against the kitchen counter with an expression that looked peaceful and a little sad at the same time. "Everything after this belongs to you," he continued. "If you decide you want your old routines back, that is your choice. If you want to say yes to every opportunity you used to avoid, that is your choice too. I never wanted you to depend on my decisions. I wanted you to trust your own." I laughed softly, shaking my head. "You know what is ironic?" He raised an eyebrow. "For the first time in 30 days, I can do absolutely anything I want." "That is right. And I have no idea what I am supposed to do tomorrow." Logan smiled with the quiet patience that had carried me through every strange rule. "That feeling goes away," he said. "You just have to make the first decision without looking at anyone else for permission." I nodded, but my thoughts refused to settle. As I left his apartment that evening, my phone remained silent in my pocket. No vibration, no message, no new rule. Standing beside my truck beneath the fading orange sky, I realized something unexpected. The only instruction I wanted to hear was the one that would never arrive again. And for the first time since this strange journey had started, the next move belonged entirely to me. The next morning, I made a decision before I had time to overthink it. I did not wait for my phone to buzz because I already knew it would stay silent. I did not make a list of reasons or imagine every possible outcome. I simply grabbed my keys, picked up the framed photograph I had taken by the lake, and drove across the city. Halfway there, I almost turned around twice. Old habits do not disappear overnight. They whisper that certainty is safer than honesty. But every mile reminded me of something Logan had quietly taught me over the past 30 days. The best choices are not always the easiest ones. When I arrived at the fire station, one of the crew members smiled as soon as he saw me. "He is off today," he said. "Try the park by Sloan Lake. He goes there whenever he wants to think." I thanked him and headed back toward my truck. 20 minutes later, I spotted Logan sitting on a weathered bench overlooking the water with a paperback book resting beside him. He looked up as I approached, clearly surprised. "You found me," he said. "I had help." He smiled and shifted over, leaving enough room for me to sit. For a while we watched people jogging along the trail, children learning to ride bicycles, and ducks gliding across the calm water. It felt strangely similar to the afternoon when he had told me to stop photographing buildings. Except this time, neither of us was hiding behind a game. Finally, I placed the framed photograph on the bench between us. Logan looked down at it and laughed softly. It was the picture I had taken without thinking, the one where the sunset had wrapped around him in warm golden light. "You kept it," he said. "It became my favorite photograph." He looked at me instead of the picture. "I thought you said the sunset deserved the credit." I smiled. I was not being completely honest. He nodded once, as though he had already known. I took a slow breath. "You told me the last decision had to be mine." "It does." "Then this is it." The words felt terrifying for exactly 1 second before they became the easiest thing I had ever said. The most important sentence I spoke during the bet was supposed to be just another rule. I kept telling myself I only said it because you asked me to. The problem is that it never stopped being true. Logan remained perfectly still. I continued before fear could interrupt me again. "You never forced me to become someone different. You reminded me of who I already was. You believed in me before I remembered how to believe in myself." And somewhere between the blue jacket, the diner, the hike, the ridiculous rules, and that notebook, I stopped looking forward to your messages because of the game. I started looking forward to you. His eyes softened, but he still said nothing. I realized he was giving me exactly what he had promised on the last day. Complete freedom to choose. I reached over and gently took his hand. This is the first decision I have made completely on my own, I said. I am choosing you. For a brief moment, neither of us moved. Then Logan smiled with the same quiet warmth I had captured in that photograph weeks earlier. He squeezed my hand gently and answered with a voice that sounded lighter than I had ever heard before. I have been hoping you would make that decision for a very long time. The lake shimmered beneath the afternoon sun while life continued all around us, ordinary and unhurried. The bet had ended days earlier, but something far more meaningful had begun. There were no more rules to follow, no more games to win, and no more reasons to hide behind uncertainty. There were only two best friends walking forward together, this time by choice, each finally trusting the future enough to meet it side by side.